Lost planes found after decades. Researchers are stunned when they see what's inside. Philip struggled to get up on the mountain. He had been tasked to plant a satellite device on top of the mountain, but got a lot more than he bargained for. When reaching the top, he stares right at an abandoned plane. He realizes that this had to be here for decades. How could something so big go unnoticed for so long? Philip struggled with the decision if he should enter all by himself or not. He did not see a safe way inside of the plane. If he would get hurt, no one would notice that he was gone. This was too big for Philip to research on his own, so he signaled two of his colleagues with a flare gun, and they flew over by helicopter immediately. Philip was the first person who stepped inside the plane. His mouth fell open instantly. How is it possible that no one knew about this? An anonymous letter. The answer would soon be revealed, but this reminded Philip of when he received an anonymous cryptic letter at home a couple of days ago. Without notice, he was called to the research station before discovering the plane. It had been a long time since Philip felt this motivated for a project. There was a lot about this project that interested him. He wondered why this person had chosen him in particular and how he or she got his address. He arrived at the town a few days after he had received the letter. It was a very old and empty town. He had knocked on almost every door when he saw an old man walking the streets. Philip ran toward the man and asked if he could tell him something about the urban legend. Philip sat across from the man and put his notebook on the table. The man stayed silent for a while, but then he started talking. The legend goes as follows. There once was a plane with the number 66 that was supposed to fly to Japan. No one knew who was on the plane or what it was carrying, and as soon as the plane took off, it went off the radar. Some say there was a horrible storm, but scientists debunked that theory. To this day, no one knows what happened to that plane. Philip looks at the man in disbelief. The man in turn looked at him stoically. He wanted to ask more questions, but the man got up and walked out of the cafe. The only thing that Philip could do now. He went on his own search. But first, he had to figure out what route the plane could have flown and followed that route. But how does he figure this out? Then suddenly he gets an idea. The local airport employees needed to know something about the plane's disappearance, so he started at the Alaskan airport. But he soon realized there had to be a different airport because no one knew about plane 66. When Philip came home from the airport, he saw a little note attached to his door. He wondered who it could be from, but there was no name or stamp on the note. Philip opened the note and immediately recognized the handwriting. It was from the same person as the anonymous letter was from, but this time, there was only one sentence. Philip reread the sentence 3 times so that he could fully absorb it. Go to the right side of town and walk along the mountain path. Find Theo. Philip wondered who this person was who kept sending him notes and letters. And who was this Theo? Philip packed his backpack and started his journey through the deserted town. The village looks like a ghost town. No light shines in the houses, and no one else is on the streets. When he reached the mountain path, he noticed something strange. There was a sign that said, "Restricted area, no trespassing." But this didn't scare Philip, and he started walking. It was a difficult path because there were a lot of loose stones and frozen puddles. He saw a little cottage in the distance. That must be Theo, he thought, and he started to walk a little faster. A storm was heading toward him, so he had to reach the cottage just in time. He banged on the door as the wind started to pick up. Then the door flipped open, and Philip stood face to face with a silhouette of a little man. "Theo?" he asked. The man pointed to a bed. On top of the bed was another note. Because of all these notes, Philip felt like he was on a scavenger hunt. The note contained coordinates. Philip is fortunately good at reading coordinates, so he knows roughly which way to go. Philip knew the plane had to be where the coordinates led him. Philip walked and walked until his legs started to get sore. He was almost at the top of the mountain, and there was still no sign of the plane anywhere. Philip looks to his left and sees something sticking out of another mountain. It doesn't look like something out of nature. He squints his eyes and suddenly recognizes a wing. That must be the plane, Philip thinks, but the plane is at least another day's walk from where he's standing, and there is something else. There is no path leading toward the plane. Philip has to go off-road to reach it, and there is a deep layer of snow. He can't see what's underneath the snow, so he has to be very careful. He made it just in time and set up his tent, but the wind started to pick up. When Philip finally reached the plane, he couldn't believe his eyes. It was almost entirely buried under the snow, except for the one wing he saw. This was way too big for Philip to do on his own, so he mapped where the plane was and journeyed back to Theo's cabin. Philip called two of his best friends, who were also researchers, Lincoln and Greg. They had no idea that Philip was all the way in Alaska, but didn't doubt him when he asked them to come too. Lincoln and Greg arrived 3 days later, and they all set up their things in Theo's cabin. It was the closest place to the plane with internet and power for their equipment. They spent the first few days digging the plane out of the snow. Somehow the plane was still mainly intact after the crash. The only things that were broken off were one side wing and the back tail of the plane. But Philip was more interested in something else he saw sticking out of the tail of the plane. Philip took the box back to the cabin and screwed it open, only to find something very strange inside. There should be a big memory card of some sort inside the box, but there was nothing. The sloth where the card should be was empty, and Philip didn't understand why. Philip had never told Lincoln and Greg about the anonymous letters until one of them asked about it. They wondered how Philip knew about this plane and why no one from the authority was helping him. They got scared when they discovered what was happening and suddenly didn't want to continue their work. Philip convinced them to continue the research, so they started drilling the next day. It was a bigger job than they anticipated, but they got through the plane's exterior after a while. Eventually, the hole was big enough, and Philip stepped inside the plane. Something in the corner of the plane glistened in the sunlight. Philip walked toward it and picked it up. It looked like a bullet, but it was all flattened by something. Philip's friends followed him inside and looked around with open mouths. They were too stunned to speak. The cockpit was empty. There were no bodies or other signs that there had been two people in there flying the plane. Suddenly, they heard a helicopter flying over their heads. Not long after that, Lincoln ran inside and yelled that the police were coming, and it didn't look good. Philip could hear the sirens from afar, and the roars of the snow scooters came closer every minute. The police arrived within a few minutes, and they surrounded the plane. Philip, Lincoln, and Greg walked out of the plane with their hands up in the air. But Philip was holding something. He was holding the anonymous letters in his hands and wanted the police to see them, but they didn't. They were taken to the police station and questioned one by one. Philip was the last one, and he could finally show the police officers the letters. They were confused as to why he had never called the police, but he explained that he was a researcher and wanted to discover it independently. Philip, Lincoln, and Greg helped the police with the case and got an honorary medal for finding the plane. But it wasn't finished yet. There was one more person that needed to be found, the anonymous tipper. The police promised Philip to find this person, but it turned out to be harder than they thought. Philip and his friends flew home, and they wrote a book about their adventure. The book became a bestseller, and everyone wondered about this anonymous tipper. But it turned out that this person was never found, and no one will ever know why they did what they did.